Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Time Travel Art Show. I'm Austin, your host, and it is currently midnight because I decided to procrastinate like a big goofball. But that's besides the point. Today we're taking a big leap forward in time from our last video. If you remember, the last video was discussing the Bhimbekta petroglyphs, which I still think I'm mispronouncing, in India, nearly 700,000 years old. The oldest known cave art currently. But, like I said, we're moving far forward in time, where we'll be delving deep into the life of one of the most famous artists of all time, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo, the one we'll be talking about today, is a borderline superhero. I mean, he is the leader of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Wait, uh, hold on, that doesn't seem right. Come on. Oh, yep. Here's my notes. Sorry, that was for a different project. Leonardo da Vinci, a man who needs really no introduction, even though I'm introducing him currently, was born in 1452 in Anciano, Tuscany. But I'm sure I don't know where that is, but you can think of it as in Italy. To a Mr. Sir Piero and Mrs. Caterina. Da Vinci, growing up, really didn't get much education other than basic reading, writing, and math. But his father appreciated his talent for art, so much so that he took him to be an apprentice to Andrea del Vercocchio of Florence at age 15. During the next decade or so, Da Vinci remained as del Vercocchio's apprentice, refining his own painting and sculpting techniques to a T, even training in some more mechanical arts, like engineering and blueprint making. Once he was 20, the Painters Guild of Florence offered him a membership, but Da Vinci elected to stay with Vercocchio, at least until he became an independent artist in the year 1478. About 4 years later, in 1482, he started to paint the Adoration of Magi, which was his first ever commissioned piece. However, Da Vinci was never able to finish this piece, as he moved to Milan to work for the Sforza clan. At this time, he served as an engineer, sculptor, painter, architect, and he even designed court festivals. The Sforza family requested that Leonardo sculpt them a massive 16-foot bronze equestrian statue in honor of the founder of their dynasty, Francesco Sforza. This project honestly took quite a long time, nearly 12 years of on and off working for him to get it nearly finished. In 1493, a clay model was ready for display. Sadly, an imminent war meant that the bronze used in the statue had to be repurposed for cannons, and even the clay model was destroyed in a conflict in 1499 when the ruling Sforza Duke fell out of power. Da Vinci moved away from Italy for good in 1516, when the French ruler, Francis I, offered him a very generous title of premier painter, engineer, and architect to the king, which was an absolutely amazing opportunity, as it allowed him to paint, draw, and sculpt at his own leisure, all while living in a country manor house named the Chateau of Klaus. There's an X, but I think it says Klaus. Although accompanied by Melzi, the man Da Vinci would eventually leave his estate to, the bitterness of his tone and some of his correspondence from the period show that Da Vinci's final years of life were most likely not happy ones. Da Vinci, sadly, passed away in the country manor in the year 1519. He was a young 67 at the time of his death. Now, that concludes the quick look at Leonardo's life, but what about his work? Da Vinci obviously is most famous for his paintings, like the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper, but I still think we should look into those, and maybe a few others as well. Only a few of Da Vinci's paintings and sculptures actually survive to today, mainly due to the fact that Da Vinci didn't push out work like a factory. Understandably, it took time, and time was not something he had to spare. However, what little that did survive became some of the most famous, probably the most famous paintings known today. I mean, like, come on, who doesn't know about the Mona Lisa? First off, we'll be covering his painting of The Last Supper, which was painting during his time in Milan between 1495 and 1498. The painting was a tempera and oil mural on plaster. Uh, don't bother asking what that means. I don't really know. I know as much as you do. The Last Supper was painted for the refectory of the monastery of Santa Maria del Grace, which was also known as the Cenacle. This large piece of work measures about 15 by 29 feet and is the Da Vinci's Da Vinci's only surviving fresco. A fresco being a painting made on wet lime plaster, from what I gathered. The painting depicts the Passover dinner, which, if you're like me and have never even touched a Bible, then it's basically the final meal during which Jesus addresses the apostles and says, "One of you shall betray me," which I'm pretty sure happens. One of the amazing details that Leonardo is constantly praised for today is his crazy detail on the emotive expressions and body language of the apostles. For example, how Jesus, while centered on the painting, is isolated from the rest of the apostles surrounding him. This is a very specific detail, and it has influenced generations and generations of painters even today. In 1499, when Milan was invaded by the French and the Sforza family fled, Da Vinci escaped as well, most likely to Venice and then Florence. While in Florence, Da Vinci painted a series of portraits which included uh, La Gioconda. That's not right. A piece that you may have heard of by its more common name, though, the Mona Lisa. Painted sometime between 1503 and 1506, the painting has been subject to speculation for centuries, and one of the biggest reasons is her strange, mysterious smile. There have been plenty of movies made, even cartoon episodes, and so on, about Da Vinci's mysteries around the painting and hidden things he may have in it. The first one that comes to mind is the Futurama episode, but that's not really what we're talking about. Today, the portrait, which is the only Da Vinci portrait from this period that survives, is stored at the Louvre Museum in Paris, France, where it is greeted by millions each year. However, Da Vinci was interested in more than just art. He studied many topics: nature, mechanics, anatomy, physics, architecture, weaponry, and more. He even had a habit he even had a habit of creating accurate workable designs for machines like the bicycle, helicopter, submarine, and military tank that no one would build or test for centuries after he had passed away. He was quoted, Sigmund Freud quoted him as being like a man who woke up too early in the darkness while the others were still asleep. Now, I'm no expert on quotes, by far no authority, but I'm pretty sure he's trying to say that Leonardo was far ahead of his time, and honestly, I believe many others agree with that sentiment. However, it was due to this large array of vast interests and beliefs that he never got much done. He had a horrible habit of moving from one topic to the next, like an ADHD prone one man band. I know how that feels. But to the meat of the topic, how did Leonardo's work in the 1400s to 1500s change our lives? There are more ways than you may think. For example, his work on dissecting bodies, human and animal alike, allowed us to understand anatomy more than any other period that came before. This completely changed how art regarding the body was done, and that includes things like surgery and study in general. Or how about his prediction of the age of flight? That's right, Da Vinci dabbled in flying machines, none of which worked at the time, but they most certainly influenced the age of flight around 400 years later. One of the most notable is this one that it was based on on the way a bat flies. It was it was very comparable to that, and even today people are confused to why it didn't work because it should have. But that's neither here nor there. Da Vinci also worked with the military. He created drafts for early versions of artillery, large cannons meant to strike from very far away, like modern day artillery, early versions of machine guns, or let's not fail to mention, armored wagons that seem to be predecessors of tanks. Tanks! Talk about being early to the party. He was ready for World War I about 500 years early. Anyways, some other things that Da Vinci influenced or invented were plenty of things you probably take for granted today. The first pair of working scissors, the first diving suits, the first working parachutes, and a machine that makes screws. I guess it can't all be everyday stuff. Basically, there are a lot of things that you have to thank Mr. Da Vinci for, but most of all, you should thank him for keeping us safe. Leading the Ninja Turtles is no easy job, and keeping away the dastardly Shredder, I couldn't imagine. But speaking of the Ninja Turtles, tune in next week for my video over Michelangelo, who worked around the same time period and is regarded to be the best artist in history. Well, that was fun-ish. I hope it's better than my last video, which admittedly wasn't the best. I'm still awkward, but maybe the fact that I'm nearly asleep helps me get out what I'm trying to say better. Next week, like I said, I'm going to be doing Michelangelo, but nothing's set in stone. If there's not enough to cover in 20 minutes, then, there you go. Anyways, I've been Austin, I will be Austin, and this has been the Time Travel Art Show.